welcome back to Trench Talk, a Metal Trenches podcast, because you need to be told what to listen to. This is episode 3. Excited about the ongoing reactions. I was very pleased at how episode 2 turned out. A lot of people were asking for sound clips from the album. Made sure that got in there, putting up links and details about, all the bands that I mentioned that we're talking about. And so I'm going to continue to try to work on improving things. I've even been looking at some equipment to try to just, up the sound quality and all that good stuff. So right off the bat, make sure that if you are listening, please do hit subscribe, hit the like button if you're on YouTube. Be sure to share, get the word out, because I want to continue to grow this and expand it and make it evolve into something kind of over time that I can be more and more proud about, and we as a community can be proud of. Alright, so the main topic today, I'm very excited to talk about this album. It's definitely going to be kind of a shift from the past 2 podcasts. I was much more focused on death metal, particularly kind of technical and progressive death metal. And today we are shifting into left field with something that is very much not that. But has easily, within a very short amount of time, become one of my favorite albums of the year. This is the new album from Daughters, and it's called You Won't Get What You Want, which ends up being a very apt song title. Daughters is a Rhode Island band. They've been around for some time, got pretty popular in the mathcore crowd, but they're kind of experimental, avant-garde. There's post-hardcore, hardcore. This album's got some electronic and industrial elements to it. It's kind of all over the place. Somebody made a comment when I posted the written review that they're like, man, your for fans of section is totally not what I generally think about when I think of this band. And I don't have the greatest frame of reference, because just to put it out there, I haven't been a huge follower of Daughters. I'm going into this review, probably like many of you, kind of being relatively new to the band. Like, I was aware of them. I had listened to some of their previous material, but I'd never really sat down and gone through an album and really followed them over the years. If you want that kind of perspective from somebody who's been listening to them for a long time and wants to really get into how much their sound has changed, there's other people out there I guarantee are doing that. I'm more than confident that the fellows over at Mathcast, who I've mentioned before, will end up talking some about that, because I know they are big fans of this band. That said, I responded to that commenter saying, this is a very different album. I likened it to kind of a mixture of, These Arms Are Snakes with the latest Ken mode, some Jesus Lizard, and you'll hear me reference, Nine Inch Nails and some stuff like that along the way as well, because this album really is just all over the place, yet super consistent, too. So the last time this band put out an album was in 2010. At that point, the band went on indefinite hiatus. They weren't really sure what was going to go on from there, but it was kind of amusing to read that I guess the founder of Robotic Empire is a big fan of Daughters, and he basically tricked Nick and Alexis into meeting up for dinner. He told one of them that hey, we're going to go and talk about this, and he told the other one, hey, we're going to talk about this, and then they just happened to be there. And so it was ended up meeting up, and by the end of that night they were ready to start writing music again, which was really cool. Some commentary from Alexis on this latest album. I've always felt we decide what a Daughters record is. It's not a sound or an aesthetic. Daughters is the name of our group, and we do whatever we want to do with it. If that's a jazz record or an opera, then that's the decision we've made. With that, this feels like the natural progression of things musically. And again, I think that is the perfect way of putting it. I actually really love that. There's a lot of bands out there that I really enjoy that kind of get away with just putting out the same record over and over again. I think of like the Black Dahlia Murder. Like, I love their albums. I own all of them, and I'm a huge fan of them. But if I really come down to it, the albums are pretty interchangeable. They have different levels of quality and consistency, but for the most part, you kind of know what you're going to get with a Black Dahlia Murder album, and that's a pro and a con. It's a pro in that, like, you know that this band is going to consistently bring you the music that you want. But on the other hand, it doesn't leave a lot of room for kind of really raw development. So I've come to really enjoy over the years certain bands that every album is a little bit different. And it seems like that's what Daughters is trying to do, especially with this album. And again, it brings back to that title of You Won't Get What You Want. It almost seems like a mission statement to all their longtime fans that if you're going into this expecting it to be our last album or any album before that, put that away right now, because that's not what this is going to be. You're not going to get what you want. I really like that. Another quotation here. This is from Nick. We've changed our sound from record to record since the beginning. We've always had a very broad interest and taste in music across the spectrum. I can respect that. This is another moment in which we pay tribute to the history of rock and roll as we like it. Since we are a rock band at heart, expect not to expect anything. So again, I love that. I am somebody who really does listen to also a broad spectrum of music. It's really hard to nail myself down. I'm definitely more of a metalhead than anything else. But I mean, I listen to Radiohead. I mentioned Coheed and Cambria. I listen to really a little bit of everything. I'm a big Aesop Rock fan from the hip hop world. Wu-Tang Clan, Incubus, their older stuff. Johnny Cash, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, just you name it, I've listened to it. And I think it's really limiting. Like, just kind of a note on elitism. I feel like elitism is just so toxic when it comes to the community. And I don't want to throw rocks at glass houses, because I know I've gone through periods in my life, especially in high school, where I kind of backed into the corner and, put on all my black clothes and, got rid of all of my other music that was not metal and sort of focused in on this genre and said, like, this is my identity and anything outside of this is, like, not cool. But over the years, I came to recognize that that's not the way to go about things. And I was not only limiting myself, but I was just kind of trading one uniform for another. You kind of joke about, like, the Hot Topic crowd versus the Abercrombie and Fitch crowd. I mean, they're really ultimately one and the same. They're just different aesthetics. One group dresses this way and that's their uniform, and the other dresses this way and that's their uniform. And I've kind of become very anti-uniform over the years. Like, sometimes you'd see me out on the street, you'd swear I'm just some hipster who, listens to a certain type of music. Other days you'll see me out there wearing my metal t-shirts and representing for that crowd. And, like, I don't believe that, like, this is the way you got to dress, this is what you got to listen to, this is what you should be into. So that's a big part of what I'm trying to do with this site as well, is just get people out of their comfort zone. I don't expect you to like everything that I put on the site, but I do want to challenge you to try stuff. And God knows, like, that this site has forced me to do that too, because I get sent stuff all the time that is not normally the type of music that I would listen to. And some of it I still don't like, and I'm just like, okay, that's not really for me. I don't feel like covering that. Other times I've been swayed over. I honestly wasn't a big black metal fan until really just a few years ago, and now I'm huge into black metal. And I'm still not a big, like, power metal fan, but I've found a few bands within that genre that I really liked. So all that to say, this this album for most people is probably going to push you outside of your comfort zone, and I think you should welcome that. And again, if you walk away still not liking it, it's not really your thing, that's fine. Try coming back to it a few times too, though. Like, that's what I've found. I've had bands and albums over the years that for a long time I really did not like, found no enjoyment, and then I came back to it, like, years later, and for some reason it just clicked all of a sudden, and it just made sense. All right, so enough of that nonsense. let me talk a little bit more about You Won't Get What You Want. So again, very different kind of album. Um, just looking over my notes here. So the album opens up. I mentioned Nine Inch Nails a little bit. There's this first track called City Song. And I describe this song as it sounds very much like a later career Nine Inch Nails song. Think after like Year Zero, Hesitation Marks, that kind of period where Trent Reznor's kind of, he's screaming less. He's kind of more like talking, doing some kind of almost like spoken word poetry, kind of mumbly. And this gives that same vibe. So it's kind of like Trent Reznor taking LSD in the pits of a clinical depression.
Cities and empty glass. Words to nothing. No one sleeps. Cities and empty glass.
There's this kind of monotonous humming industrial hook going on in the background. There's a lot of repetition in this album, but it's repetition done well. I know I just said in my last podcast how I don't like needlessly long and repetitious songs, but when they're done right, it really works. And something about how Daughters has done it here, I think a lot of it has to do with the variation in the vocals, makes the kind of hypnotic qualities of the repetitious electronics and guitars all go over really well and just work. So I wasn't sure about this song at first. It's really muted, kind of droning, like I said, but it's so infectious. And after I'd listened to it once or twice, I was just totally bought into it. I love the industrial alternative vibes to it. And again, this is a 6-minute song, so you'd think it would kind of get old, but it really doesn't. Like, it just kind of seeps deeper and deeper and deeper into you. There's this weird soothing aspect to it, but it's counterbalanced by this weird kind of tense anxiety that I'm going to talk about a lot more as I go on here. But this groove and the kind of quiet spoken word elements that come in really get you going. Now that is until towards the end of the song, there's a sudden explosion where the distortion and it's kind of still the same overall structure of the song, but it just gets super loud and really aggressive and abrasive, and it just like blows your ears out of nowhere, and there's so much just rage that comes out of it. And I'm going to play a sample of that, but it's a great moment, and that was especially like right there I knew. I was like, ooh, this is an album for me. Like this is what I want right here. They kind of set you up with this really quiet, they lull you in with this kind of sense of not security, because again there's this weird anxiety floating behind everything, but they lull you in with this quiet, and then they'll just blast you with this really angry electronic distorted music. And there's that kind of bipolar piece of it too. Like there's this weird balancing around, like I was saying, between kind of calm and anxiety and anger, and these things just seem to kind of I put it, it's like you're walking on eggshells. I described it as like if you're sitting at a friend's family dinner table and everyone's smiling and acting nice when normally like dad gets drunk and becomes abusive with the family, and they're all just kind of putting this facade on for you. And I've worked with those families, so I know very well what that feeling can be like. But yeah, there's this underlying tension that's sitting around, no matter what the music itself may exactly sound like. I also I like the wording I picked in the review of it's like subliminally induced anxiety, and that made me start thinking a lot about I'm a huge film buff, especially Stanley Kubrick is my all-time favorite director. If by some reason you're not familiar with him, he did like 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, A Clockwork Orange, and a number of just like incredible hallmarks of filmmaking. And there's this great documentary talking about his work on The Shining, and I couldn't remember the exact number. I think it's Room 237. I might have the number wrong, but I think it's Room 237. It's this documentary I watched on like Netflix or Hulu or something. It's talking about his work on The Shining. And it's super interesting because they get into how he started studying like subliminal advertising. He even met with like advertising companies and stuff and was trying to learn about how they try to use subtle sounds and cues and wording and stuff to kind of manipulate people into feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way about the product. And he utilized that in The Shining in a number of ways with like the soundtrack, but also with his use of space is really weird. People have there's a website actually dedicated to this where people have tried to map out the Shining mansion based on the camera movements that happen throughout it. And they use as an example, there's tracking shots of the boy riding his big wheel around the mansion with the camera following him. And they note that he'll be on the first floor and then he'll turn a corner, and without having gone up any ramps or stairs, he'll be on a balcony overlooking the first floor, and now he's on the second floor. And then there's also a scene where Jack meets with the head of the hotel for the first time to like interview for the job, and there's a window looking to the outside. But if you follow the tracking shots around that room, it's impossible for that room to have a window to the outside. There should be a wall there with a hallway on the other side. And so he doesn't point this out. He doesn't make a big show out of it, but he purposely, it leaves you feeling like something's not right here. Like your body and your mind kind of sense that something's off. Something is not the way it should be, and that just adds to your sense of anxiety and fear about the situation. And all that to say, I feel like this album kind of does that. Not all the time, but there's just, again, this purveying sense of kind of ambiguous, strange stress that you're feeling. And this even goes through the songs that are a little bit more melodic. In particular, there's this track called Satan in the Wait, which the band said was kind of inspired by Killing Joke. And there's some really beautiful, just glorious kind of... I said synth parts, but I'm not even sure if that's accurate. It sounds like some sort of stringed instrument. Maybe it's just the guitar with a special effect on it. I'm not entirely sure. Again, I will play a clip of it.
Says you wouldn't wait for the light of the dark to fade, so you wouldn't move for the miles of the dancing lane.
But this part comes in, it's just gorgeous and it's beautiful, but there's still, again, under that beauty, this just weird sense of discomfort. And I love that. Like, I really just can't get enough of that. I get those vibes too. Long Road, No Turns. This is a more obvious one in terms of like, why do I feel so tense about this? Because the riffs just sound like this noisy swarm of insects. Just buzzing around you, and that hits close to home with me, because I hate when like mosquitoes and stuff fly really close to my ears, and it just makes you it's worse than nails on a chalkboard, I think. And then there's other songs too where it sounds like scraping machinery, like in The Reason They Hate Me, which was one of the lead singles. Just all around amazing song. But yeah, this riff just sounds like it's just this scraping, repeating machinery that's kind of, it needs to be oiled or something. And then on top of all this, there's these vocals that, and this is where the "These Arms Are Snakes" influences come in for me. It's like if you've ever seen movies, or even there was like an episode of the X-Files, I think, that did this too, where they've got those like the like snake handling church, and the preacher is this big like Southern Baptist kind of animated guy, and they've got this particular voice that I always associate with certain bands that use this style. And there's a little bit of like Clutch and Fugazi in there, or Fugazi, I should say, I think is the correct pronunciation. Um, and also there's a track from The Chariot that has a guest vocalist that kind of uses the style too, but it's very like, and the Lord will protect you from the snakes, and they will not bite you, and you will not be harmed. And it's like this very dramatic. Thank you. That was my Academy Award right there. But anyways, you'll get what the idea when I play this though. This vocalist from Daughters just takes this to the nth degree, and again, I think that's something that he doesn't so much sing as he just projects this weird prophetic bravado, and there's no like static melody to it. So again, even though the music can be kind of repetitious, his voice is just all over the place, and it's another element that just draws you in, and it keeps it ever from kind of getting old and getting stale. But yeah, in the end, the whole album's just this work of perfect balance, not only between that tension and beauty, but also just noise and catchiness. Sometimes I rail against either extreme there, where it's like too noisy, where it turns me off, or it's too catchy and kind of poppy, and then I'm just like, ugh, like I need a little bit more substance to this. So that can be really irritating. But that, again, perfect balance. I also described it, the more I thought about it, the more I listened to it. It's kind of like listening to like a shoegaze album. Like, why can't I think of the band right now? Maybe it'll come to me. I don't know. But if you listen to shoegaze, again, it's like this repetitious droning thing with like the kind of almost spoken word, kind of muted vocalist. But so you take shoegaze and then you add like this demented level of like aggression and angst to it, and then this much more dense atmosphere, and again the kind of haunting lyrics, and what you get is this Daughters album. Another clip I wanted to play kind of to illustrate that is from the Lord's song. Other things that this reminds me of, I had this strange thinking about the black metal band Altar of Plagues. Their final album was, they had previously done a lot of just sort of typical kind of atmospheric black metal, but the last album had this really industrial vibe to it with, again, these kind of clanking machinery kind of sounds. And so I was thinking about that. If you kind of liked this album, but you weren't sure about it, and you're kind of like, I really want something straight up metal, a lot heavier, then I highly recommend Altar of Plague's final album. And then another thing I was thinking of with the vocals too was the band Me Without You. And again, like, he's not as like animated prophetic, but again, he's more like spoken word, kind of half shouted lyrics, and a lot of repeated lyrics too, which you'll hear on this album. And like there's a classic song from like their first or second album where he's just like saying, we'll be like torches, like over and over again. And you get caught up in it and you start singing along, and you may not even be entirely sure what it is he's talking about. But I digress. You know, there's elements of this on this album, and those are all things that I really enjoy from, again, a lot of different genres and subgenres kind of came together to Frankenstein this incredible album together. And I really thought that Ken Mode's latest album kind of struck this balance the best, and I was like really holding that album up. I still am. I highly recommend checking out that album from Ken Mode. However, I think Daughters did it better, like way better. Like this is pretty much perfection. Every song is amazing. I can't stop listening to this album. It's been over and over again. I have to ultimately like drop albums out of my rotation so I can kind of move on to the next thing very quickly and keep up the pace. But I have a feeling that this album is going to be sitting in my rotation for some time, and I'll probably keep going back to it as I'm listening to all this new stuff that I need to cover. I don't really have any complaints either. I've pretty much no critiques that I can really give. I didn't give it a 10, but at the same time, like it's so good, and I'm just picky about giving 10s. I'm not. It's hard for me to really narrow down why I didn't give it a 10 because it very well might deserve one, and maybe by the end of the year I'll decide to kind of crank it up to that. So easily, Daughters dropping one of the best albums of the year. I'd argue probably the best of their career. Now again, that's from someone who hasn't really been intensely listening to them for a long time, but based on what I've heard from their earlier material, I like this a lot more. I think it's a lot more evolved, a lot more mature, a lot more interesting. Overall, I'm starting to lose my voice. And to play a pun on the album title again, you don't get what you want, but you do get what you need. This, whether you know it or not, this is exactly what you need. You need to listen to this. So whether you're a longtime fan of the band or you're a total newbie to it, you need to not only listen to this album, but buy this album. It is so worth it. I picked it up on Amazon for, it was like $13-14. Totally worth it. Can't wait for it to show up. It's got cool album art too, kind of this creepy, white, smudgy painted face on a black background, very minimalist, and purposefully kind of sloppy looking, but also very eerie, which again kind of matches the overall atmosphere. My favorite tracks: Long Road No Turns, The Lord's Song, and The Reason They Hate Me. I gave it a 10 for enjoyability because again, from the very beginning, about 30 seconds in, I was hooked. Every single song is amazing and I can't stop listening to it. Musicianship, I gave it a 9. For the genre, I mean, you could probably crank that up to a 10, but if I'm thinking overall in terms of musicianship, I've heard other bands do more kind of complicated, complex, intricate technical stuff, so that's why I gave it a 9. And then I gave it a 9 for innovation, because again, it's one of the most different albums of the year. It's not so out there. I only really give a 10 in innovation if like I have genuinely never heard this before. Like I've never heard anything like this before. And so I don't quite think this album is at that level, but it's damn close, and it's definitely one of the most unusual albums you'll hear this year. So all that averaged out to a 9.3, but again, I might be comfortable rounding that up to a 10 later on as we close out things in a couple months. So that's Daughters. Amazing. Get it. Buy it. Love it. Turning to shout outs here. First off, I've got Noise Trail Immersion, Symbology of Shelter. This is a blackened hardcore with some djent influences. It's their third album. This is an Italian band. They dropped this through Moment of Collapse Records. I already really loved their last album, but this album they really stepped it up. Especially the first half is just so fast, so intense, and so technical. And it just perfectly merges. And you wouldn't think those things go together. You wouldn't think that like blackened atmosphere would go with djent. But it totally works the way that they do it. So definitely check these guys out if you're a fan of Frontier, Sectioned, Hellkeeper, things of that nature. This is an awesome album. Similar to that, we have Telos. This is a Copenhagen-based band. There is such a thriving scene of blackened hardcore coming out of Denmark, and it's just a hotbed for like the darkest, most deranged blackened bands coming out right now. And it's so exciting to listen to. So there are some similarities to Noise Trail Immersion, but not with that gent element. It's more straightforward hardcore with a lot of blackened atmosphere. This is their debut album. It's through Warg, Wooaargh. If you've listened to stuff like Hexus, Converge, Eglise, definitely in the vein of that. Really great riffs, great atmosphere, dark, super, super dark, but also kind of fun too, because it's hardcore. So not fun in like a hee, like we're having a party kind of fun, but just like great hooks in it, and it's enjoyable to listen to, even though it's kind of soul-sucking at the same time. All right, this next one, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. The band is Gorycz, Gorycz. This is a Polish band, so I'm sure I'm getting the pronunciation wrong. The album's called Piach or Piach, Piach.
Grobem ziemia nie będę.
This is a black metal band. I guess Gorycz, again, if I'm pronouncing it right, it translates to bitterness, which is great. This is a really insidious album. It's through Pagan Records. And it's interesting because it's not your typical black metal where it's really focused on like blast beats and tremolo lines. This band's not like that at all. Like it's a much slower, kind of sludgy, swampy vibe. They've got the really grim black metal vocals, but it's kind of this weird like groove-based thing, and it's hard to understand it without just hearing it. But there's something different. Check this out. Just check it out and see what you think about it. And I'm interested to hear comments on that as well. All right, and then finally going back a little bit further, we've got A Forest of Stars, Grave Mounds and Grave Mistakes.
Spiraling down into the pit of possessing carrion, you go life, admonishing the vultures to tear away your fears.
Forest of Stars is a UK band. They're sort of a progressive black metal band. They're interesting too, though, because they've got this avant-garde flair, and I wanted to share them in this particular podcast because, again, I was talking about interesting vocals that have this weird kind of prophetic, more spoken word kind of vibe. A Forest of Stars does that too, but not with like the Snake Baptist vibe. It's more of like listening to like a musical or a stage play, and it's this super dramatic guy with this English accent, and he does have some growl moments, and I like that they don't overuse it too, because it really makes it, when he goes into that growl, you get chills because he underuses it. And so when it happens, you know that like, oh shit, like it's getting real right now. But most of the time it's this very dramatic, just over the top vibe. The musicianship is really cool. There's kind of folk elements and progressive elements, and it's really lush and full atmosphere, very conceptual. The whole concept of the band is basically that they're like a bunch of gentlemen from the 1800s, and you'll see pictures of them wearing like top hats and stuff. But their albums take you on great journeys. This new album's no different. But I honestly like the last one just a tad more than this one. So if you like that one, or maybe even if you don't, backtrack to Beware the Sword You Cannot See. That was my all-time favorite album of, I think that was 2015, but I'm not exactly sure. Man, that is an incredible album. So check those albums out. Totally worth your time. If you like Isan, Shamash, even like I'll throw Moon Sorrow in there, even though it's a little bit different. But all those vibes kind of get in a blender to come out to sound like this album. That's it for today. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Please do, again, hit subscribe, share, hit the like button, drop us a comment, head over to our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Vero. We have a Patreon page. If you like what we're doing, you'd like to see more, you'd like to see us advance our production and technology and all that, please do, support us there, help us out. Links of all these bands and the reviews and the streams and all that will be in the description. And just again, thank you so much. It's been so great hearing all the positive feedback. I've been really encouraging people to be brutal with me. If there's something I do that you really don't like, I'm a big boy. I can handle it. You will not hurt my feelings. You can go ahead and try, though, and it's going to help me be better, because that's what this is all about. I want to be better, and I want this podcast to be better. So all that to say, go get out there and listen to some fucking heavy music. Thanks again.